It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Conservative peer Michelle Mone admits she stands to profit tens of millions of pounds from a pandemic PPE contract, but says she's being made a scapegoat. New details emerge about the missing British teenager Alex Batty's time in France as he spends his first day back in the UK. A desperate scramble for aid in Gaza as international pressure mounts on Israel for a sustainable ceasefire. Plus, an historic milestone. A remote Scottish island becomes the UK's first licensed spaceport for vertical rocket launches. The council's cutting back this Christmas and the community taking matters into its own hands. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. The government is facing calls tonight to answer questions about a PPE contract awarded during the pandemic after the Conservative peer, Michelle Mone, admitted for the first time that she does stand to benefit from the multi-million-pound deal. The lingerie tycoon conceded that she made an error in previously denying her links to the PPE company Medpro, but insisted that she and her husband have no case to answer. Well, now Labour is calling for the then Cabinet Office Minister, Michael Gove, to face MPs. In 2020, Baroness Mone contacted Mr Gove to refer PPE Medpro to supply protective equipment to the NHS during the pandemic via what was known as the VIP lane. The company was later awarded government contracts worth more than £200 million. Millions of gowns the company supplied were never used. They were rejected after a technical inspection in 2020, but the company insists they did meet the specifications. When questioned by reporters in December that year, Baroness Mone denied having any links to her husband's company, PPE Medpro. But in November 2021, the government revealed Baroness Mone was in fact the source of the referral. PPE Medpro is now being sued by the Department of Health and Social Care for £122 million for breach of contract and unjust enrichment. The National Crime Agency has also been investigating the company since 2021. Sky's political correspondent Rob Powell reports.
Baroness, businesswoman, beneficiary of £60 million of profit made by selling protective equipment to the government during the pandemic. For years, Conservative peer Michelle Mone and her husband have denied any links to the firm PPE Medpro. Now they say they were lying, but only to protect their family from press intrusion.
We've done a lot of good, but if we were to say anything that we have done, that we are sorry for, and we should have told the press straight up, straight away, nothing to hide. And again, I'm sorry for that, but I wasn't trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. No one.
Baroness Mone commissioned a journalist to make a documentary setting out her side of the story, saying she was simply responding to a call from the government to help provide equipment, that PPE Medpro was cheaper than rival firms who were also making a profit, and ministers were to blame if the gowns weren't suitable.
There is an ongoing investigation both by the National Crime Agency and indeed the Department of Health is suing the company concerned in civil litigation. So there's a limit to what I can say, but I don't recognise that characteristic, no.
But for those who ran care homes at the time, there's anger at people making money from a national emergency.
It's disappointing, really, that companies were actually profiteering while social care enterprises were on their knees. We were paying whatever we could to get just a basic amount of PPE, and yet companies were sitting there profiteering.
Given the strains hospitals were under, this story of PPE, profits and political connections touched a nerve across the country.
Michelle Mone and her husband have admitted lying to journalists, but maintain they've done nothing wrong, saying this was a legitimate business deal that made a legitimate profit. The couple say they've been made scapegoats. They've certainly become lightning rods for wider anger about how money was spent and lost by the government during the pandemic.
Jennifer Holloway's not-for-profit company also supplied PPE to the health service. After having to make redundancies at her firm, she wants answers about how providers were selected.
You're in a position of power and you're in a position of privilege. And I think not only is Baroness Mone responsible, but also the government's responsible. They knew there were companies in the UK that could be there, ready and waiting, and we could have had then job security, we could have created new jobs.
Baroness Mone has now laid out her defence, but with a court case, National Crime Agency probe and Lord's Standards inquiry all running, it may be some time before we know whether she's broken the rules or the law.
And Rob joins me now from Westminster. Rob, just how dangerous is this for the government, with Labour now calling for Michael Gove to answer to MPs?
Yeah, there is a lot of danger here for the government, and with MPs due back here in Westminster tomorrow for their final 2 days before Christmas, as you say, Labour is calling on Michael Gove to come and address MPs to tell them more about what he knew about the Baroness Mone story and the PPE Medpro contracts. He, of course, was the minister that Baroness Mone first contacted back in 2020. On one level, the government is saying it is the victim in this. It is, of course, suing PPE Medpro, but there is potential for more damage as well. We know the National Crime Agency started an inquiry into Baroness Mone and her husband in May 2021 into suspected criminal offences. They say that is an intelligence-led inquiry. If it does make it to court, though, that could uproot a lot of detail. More broadly, we know that the PPE Medpro contracts came through the so-called VIP lane that was set up during the COVID pandemic to essentially prioritise suppliers that came from politicians and people with political connections. That's already been subject to a lot of criticism and legal challenges. The High Court last year ruling its operation was unlawful. The government say it was about getting equipment to the front line in the NHS as quickly as possible. But we do know that billions of pounds of PPE was not used because it wasn't suitable. Ultimately, the COVID inquiry will run the rule over that. As for Baroness Mone, she is currently on a leave of absence here from the House of Lords while she says she attempts to clear her name.
OK, Rob, thanks for that update. New details have emerged this evening about British teenager Alex Batty's time in France. Alex was 11 when he vanished after a trip to Spain with his mother and grandfather 6 years ago. He returned to the UK last night. Now, a French couple have claimed that he stayed with them multiple times in the past 3 years, while his mother, who was not his legal guardian, lived in a nearby commune. Katerina Vitozzi reports.
For the very first time, there's an insight into some of Alex Batty's life in the 6 years since he disappeared from the UK. Today, a French couple, Fred and Ingrid Gove, claimed that Alex, known to them as Zach, visited their bed and breakfast in the southwest of France, the first time in 2021 with his mother, and then returning by himself multiple times, doing light jobs in the garden in exchange for board and lodging. In a statement, the couple say, "He stayed with us for some longer or shorter periods. He left several times to join his mother in her successive places of residence between Aude and Ariège. We didn't have much contact with his mother, and she never lived at the Gîte de la Bastide. As far as we know, she was looking for a place to live in a collective." The last time Zach or Alex came back to us was at the beginning of this summer. As time went on, we saw him as part of our family, and we think he appreciated the stability and security we represent for him. The couple say they only found out who Alex really was from press reports, and the last time they saw him, he told them he was going back to the UK to get ID to enrol in a school. We now know that Alex then walked for 4 days towards Toulouse after leaving them, before he was found by a French student and given a lift near the town of Revel. He arrived back in the UK on Saturday night, reunited with his grandmother Susan, his legal guardian, who still lives in Oldham in Greater Manchester, who last saw him leave to go on a holiday with his mother and grandfather in 2017. Oldham is where Alex Batty disappeared from as an 11-year-old boy and will, over the next week or so, return now as a 17-year-old young man. Over the past 6 years, his grandmother Susan has continued to issue emotional appeals asking for information about where he is. And now she can finally say he will be safely brought back. Greater Manchester Police say they will take the next few days at a pace that's suitable for Alex. The whereabouts of his mother, Melanie Batty, is still unknown. Katerina Vitozzi, Sky News, Oldham.
Israel's military says it will learn lessons as it revealed further details about the circumstances surrounding the deaths of 3 hostages taken captive by Hamas, who were mistakenly killed by Israeli defence forces in Gaza earlier this week. It comes as Israel is facing growing international pressure, with the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, and his German counterpart today backing calls for a sustainable ceasefire, warning that too many civilians have lost their lives in the conflict. Sky's Alex Rossi reports from Jerusalem, and warning his report begins with images of bodies being carried in bags, which you may find distressing.
There is a growing sense of urgency that the situation in Gaza cannot continue. The relatives of this family, whose bodies have just been recovered, claim they were sheltering in a school when they were killed.
My sister was at this point and her children were in her arms. They had all been lying here. Shots had been fired at them and they had Hebrew writing on their foreheads.
According to the health authority in Gaza, the death toll is heading towards 20,000. MP Layla Moran has relatives trapped inside a church inside Gaza City.
They're not even allowing them to leave the Sunday school rooms. If they venture into the courtyard, they are being shot. And that happened 2 days ago. There was a mother and a daughter. It makes a mockery of the suggestion that the Israeli army is protecting civilians.
And more details are emerging about the 3 Israeli hostages that were accidentally killed by the IDF. These images show SOS signs on the building where they were situated.
Tonight we published photos of a building where the 3 hostages were staying, about 200 metres from the scene where the disaster happened. We still don't know how long they were in the building. We are checking another structure that they may have stayed in as well. We continue to investigate this incident and learn the lessons.
The Israeli military claims it doesn't target civilians, but the US has stated Israel is losing global support for its military operation. Other key allies, including the UK, are calling for a sustainable ceasefire. It is becoming clear that the United States is losing patience with Israel because of the rising civilian casualties in Gaza and the vision about what happens when the fighting stops. But in defiance of the Biden administration, Prime Minister Netanyahu says he opposes calls for a revitalized Palestinian Authority to govern the Strip as an interim measure on the way towards a 2-state solution. And as the IDF continue pressing further into Gaza, the Israeli leader is also adamant he'll not bow to any international pressure on the timetable for the military operation.
We will achieve all of our goals: elimination of Hamas, the release of all of our hostages, and a promise that Gaza will not once again become a centre of terror.
But things are becoming increasingly desperate inside Gaza the longer this conflict goes on. There is a trickle of aid entering the Strip every day. These trucks carrying supplies were mobbed as they entered through the Rafah crossing. But much, much more is needed, with humanitarian organisations saying the population is now at breaking point. Alex Rossi, Sky News.
61 people, including women and children, are believed to have drowned after their boat sank off the coast of Libya yesterday as they tried to reach Europe. It comes as the world's leading commission for missing persons has told Sky News that the Mediterranean is becoming a mass grave. According to the International Organization for Migration, there have been more than 1.8 million attempted crossings made within the Mediterranean between 2016 and October 2023. Since then, over 20,000 migrants have been recorded as dead or missing. The nature of the journey means that it's highly likely that migrants may disappear without a trace. And in this year alone, more than 2,500 migrants have died in the Mediterranean. That's the highest recorded number in 5 years. Our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, has had rare access to the coroner tasked with identifying hundreds of bodies in Greece and a Syrian family receiving the news that their loved one hasn't survived the journey. Just to warn you, you may find this report distressing.
They've come in search of a painful truth. A Syrian family looking for their brother who disappeared trying to get to Europe. They suspect he's dead, and now they've seen a clue. A picture of what looks like his clothing posted by this Greek coroner. So they've come to see him, armed with the only evidence they've got.
We have a picture, actually.
The coroner is almost sure the remains of their loved one are here.
The body outside the refrigerator.
But he needs to be certain. He shows them the photos of clothing.
This body. With these shoes. Look at these shoes in television.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
This.
Yeah.
A moment of recognition. It's him. But to get the body back, they need medical proof.
You must give DNA.
They're asked to go to the police station and provide a sample. That process will take weeks.
This is almost about your...
Pavlidis has spent more than 2 decades trying to identify migrants who've died. He has boxes of possessions he finds on their bodies, handwritten notes from friends and family, watches, jewellery. Oh, gosh. A baby's dummy.
This is one unique story. It's difficult, but this may work.
Bodies are stored here for months on end, hoping someone will come to find them.
It's very important for me to give the answer to the relatives. It's not a good answer, but it's answer. And the relatives, they must know what exactly happened.
Getting into Europe is tough. Many of the routes are perilous, and thousands have already died this year trying to cross the Mediterranean. To try to identify the victims, they lean on DNA. It's a process that started with the worst massacre of the Bosnian War.
We started using DNA because of Srebrenica. What we're talking about now with the crisis related to missing migrants, which is now a global phenomenon. Europe today has the highest number of dead and missing migrants in the world. And the Mediterranean is becoming a mass grave on a scale that has not been seen in the world before.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the remote Greek countryside, Mehmet opens the cemetery that he helped to set up, a final home for migrants who've never been identified.
A person is buried here, and we don't know where they're from or what their nationality was. For us, all that matters is that they were a fellow human being, and so they deserve our respect. That's all.
Well, these plain stones are there to mark the graves of migrants who died trying to get to Europe, whose identity wasn't known and never will be known. There are hundreds of them here, and this is just a snapshot of tens of thousands of people who've died anonymously. The people buried here had all dreamed of reaching Europe. It was a hope that cost them their lives, even their identities. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Northern Greece.
The government is considering restricting the use of social media for under-16s. Ministers are planning to launch a consultation in the new year in an effort to bolster online safety laws. But no formal announcement has been made as yet. Here's what Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden told Trevor Phillips on Sky News this morning.
What I do think, and I saw this when I was Digital Secretary, and I see it speaking to my constituents elsewhere, there is a real worry from parents about how they can protect their children from the harms of social media. Now, of course, as a Conservative, I don't want to reach for a lever of banning, but we need to look at how we can protect children online. And I think any reasonable government should do that.
Luton Town captain Tom Lockyer remains in hospital after suffering a cardiac arrest on the pitch yesterday. The club says he's still awaiting results of tests and scans following his collapse at Bournemouth. A tiny island in Shetland is set to become the UK's first spaceport for vertical rocket launches. Saxford Spaceport has been granted the licence by the Civil Aviation Authority. It could see up to 30 launches a year and will cater for companies looking to launch satellites into orbit. Adele Robinson reports.
The tiny Scottish island of Unst, now front and centre of the global space industry. For the first time in history, a spaceport on British soil has been given the all-clear for vertical rocket launches.
If somebody had told me that I'd be talking to you about building a spaceport on Shetland now, I'd say, can I have something of what you're drinking?
Bought by Frank Strang with initial plans for an eco-tourism attraction nearly 20 years ago, he says they now have the first orbital launch licence in Western Europe.
It puts the UK right at the head of the European space race, and it shows the world that the UK is very serious about the space economy. It's about inward investment. All of our clients are international. It's about the supply chain, it's about education. It's huge, it's massive. And the next year is going to be pretty pivotal in where the UK stands in the global space industry.
Earlier this year, the first ever satellite mission launched from the UK ended in failure in Cornwall.
It appears that Launcher 1 has suffered an anomaly.
That was a horizontal launch. The Shetland site's been given a licence by the Civil Aviation Authority for vertical ones and for 30 a year.
This launch activity is really important, but only one part of the UK's sort of space heritage and capability. The UK's got a fantastic track record over many decades of designing and manufacturing satellites.
Concerns have been raised by wildlife campaigners over the potential impact here, but those behind the spaceport say there are restrictions on launches. Meanwhile, liftoff will be next year, with the first satellites launched, propelling the future of the UK's space economy into orbit. Adele Robinson, Sky News.
Cash-strapped councils across the country have been cutting back on their festive celebrations this year, cancelling Christmas lights, trees and markets. But one community has taken matters into their own hands, raising £25,000 to save their light display. Ashna Haranag reports.
'Tis the season that's been ruined, say some of the residents of Braintree in Essex, after a decision to scale back the Christmas decor and not hold a traditional light switch on.
For many years now, the high street has had less and less lights. And this year, no lights whatsoever. So, complete disappointment. And for all of us, but for the townspeople, for the children, for people that live in the town, yeah, it's shocking.
A financial squeeze for the local council meant the lights were first off the Christmas list.
It's not even about the money, but just the community spirit.
For Daria, the decision has put a dampener on both. She relies on the flurry of Christmas trade.
It's devastating. As a small business, we expected loads more business this year, especially for Christmas.
For an increasing number of towns and cities unable to afford the cost of running annual displays, it's been more like a full stop. Braintree Council says the cost to invest in new lights is simply too high, but has supported other community events. Decorations in the town where a young Charles Dickens fell in love with Christmas had been in danger too. Outraged, the Rochester community stepped in. When you found out then that these lights weren't going to be here, tell me about what went through your head.
Devastated. I thought about it as a parent, as a mum, and the fact that we're a destination point at Christmas, to celebrate Christmas as an independent high street, to not have our lights would be like just switching the light off. Why would you bother?
No lights here was not an option. So a fundraising page was set up, and within days the people of Rochester smashed the target.
We just put it out there, 6 o'clock Friday night. We thought, great, let's just see how we go. And Monday morning, there was almost £25,000 in the crowdfunding page. We hit our first target, so it was an incredible weekend. It was life-affirming to know that the community wanted to invest in it.
Paul was one of those who donated.
It's tough times for a lot of people, and I think Christmas is a bit of a respite from that, isn't it? That kind of festive cheer, festive spirit. It's, you know, it's an uplifting time.
One that wouldn't have been the same without some sparkle. Funding from businesses in the end meant the local council did manage to switch the lights on here. But the generosity of the town's people may have guaranteed that they stay on in years to come. Ashen Harinag, Sky News.
Time now to get all the latest sports news from David.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Well, Stuart, it's been a few months now since the end of what was an incredible Ashes series. How are you adjusting now to life after playing cricket?
Yeah, really enjoying it. You know, I think ultimately finishing on my own terms was really important for me, and I knew that I wanted to finish bowl my last ball playing for England. England versus Australia was a major pinnacle for me in Ashes cricket, and it was such a exciting and exhilarating series that I almost got to the stage where I don't know if it gets any better than this, really. So yeah, it was great to be able to sort of make the decision on my own, finish on my own terms, and I don't think it will really properly hit me until the Test team play again, and Jimmy Anderson and Ben Stokes are walking out with an England cap on in their whites. I think that might sort of feel real, that I won't ever do that again. But no, at the moment I've got no regrets and feel really happy.
In the book you spoke about the fact that retirement only really came to you during the Old Trafford tests. So you came to a massive decision quite quickly.
Yeah, within 10 days, I think. So yeah, it was pretty stressful. You know, ultimately, any time you walk away from something you love, it's really difficult. And I was loving playing cricket. I was loving working under Stokesy and Baz. It was great fun. I didn't feel much pressure. The communication was really good, and I was bowling really well and felt fit. So a lot of those things would say, carry on playing. And I honestly felt like I could do another couple of years, but I kept sort of bringing myself back to what's my next Everest, what's my next major challenge. I always need a challenge because I've got this goal to always continuously improve. I need something to charge towards and chase. And whenever I've written down in my whole career what's my next Everest, bang, within 30 seconds I've written down and I know what to target, and I just couldn't quite nail something down. So I think that ultimately told me that it was the right time to move and try something different.
Next Ashes 2 years away. Would that have felt too far when you were making that decision a few months ago?
No, I think I'd still be fit and fresh to play, but I know that a young family played a part as well. You know, Annabella's turning 1. The travels a lot in international cricket, and the young years are so valuable. Ultimately, I'm 37. Next Ashes be 39, and although I still feel like I'd be able to play, I didn't want to sacrifice some sort of memories and special moments I could share with my family up until then. And because you have to dedicate your life to playing for England, you have to dedicate everything to it. And you know, I've done that for 17 years, and you know, it's time to still feel very focused on a career, but spend a bit more time at home.
And you bowed out in magical circumstances. Last ball you hit for 6. Last ball you bowled was a wicket. 150 wickets in Ashes cricket. What was it about that series that always...
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the political editor for HuffPost UK, Kevin Schofield, and political journalist and broadcaster Theo Usherwood. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Metro. I lied, but it's not a crime. Baroness Mone's admission she misled journalists over multi-million-pound PPE contracts. We'll be right back with that and other stories. Do stay with us.
'23, a new year, bringing with it new hope.
This is incredible.
That's what I like about it.
Give us a song then, Rod.
Good news, it's not extinct.
To start planting a whole new rainforest.
It's really heartwarming to help others.
India, the first to land south of the moon.
The lonelier sheep has been rescued.
Love it.
Did amazing.
Best story of the day.
It's saying I've got a Sky News break on my own phone.
News never stops.
I'm Inzamam Rashid and I'm Sky's North of England correspondent, telling stories from this culturally rich region I call home.
It's going to become very similar to other places and lose its unique qualities.
It's steeped in history.
If the Taliban found your family, what would happen?
I think they're just going to straight away execute them.
There are issues of racism in all levels of cricket.
I was on the balcony a couple of times. I was nearly gone.
Football is a joy to watch, and when people are disappointed, you can feel the hate.
I just felt physically sick because I was like, that's really in my system.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. Even before the pandemic, GPs were pleading for help. Government expects more face-to-face contact with patients in return.
Men, they want to force you doing something which you don't want to do, just because you're homeless and you're looking for a warm place to sleep.
We give a voice to communities often unheard and unserved from a region with a distinct history and global impact.
Five of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Michelle Mone has admitted she did not tell the truth about her links to PPE firm, which made millions during the pandemic, but insisted that she and her husband had done nothing wrong. The Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron has called for a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza as international pressure grows on Israel. And the world's leading commission for missing persons told Sky News that the Mediterranean is now a mass grave. It comes after 61 migrants drowned off the coast of Libya. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the political editor for HuffPost UK, Kevin Schofield, and political journalist and broadcaster Theo Usherwood. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. I lied, but it's not a crime. Baroness Mone's admission she misled journalists over a £200 million PPE contract, the lead in tomorrow's Metro. The Guardian reporting that she had not told the truth about her involvement to protect her family from press attention. That story also the splash on the front of the Eye, with Baroness Mone saying she wasn't trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. The Daily Mail has a report on the newly appointed Cabinet Office Minister, Esther McVey, who it says is launching investigations into poor use of taxpayers' money. The Daily Mirror reports that a British company has sparked outrage for selling reindeer shooting hunts. The FT leads with the IMF, warning that Ukraine's economy is in peril if allies do not speed up extra funding. The Sun has a story about a family with links to Nigel Farage being arrested in a drugs raid. And the Daily Star leads with a story about the benefits of a lie-in on Christmas Day. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Kevin Schofield and Thea Usherwood. Welcome to you both. Good to see you. Let's start with The Guardian and their front page story, Baroness Mone and her admission that she did lie to the media about her involvement with the PPE firm that she recommended to the government via Michael Gove. Kevin, take us into this story.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's on the front of a lot of papers. Extraordinary interview that Michelle Mone and her husband gave this morning. Obviously, the PR strategy was to try and get on the front foot, paint themselves in a good light, almost paint themselves as the victims in all of this. They said they've been scapegoated by the government. But if that was the intention, I don't think that was how it's transpired. I mean, remarkable to see her admit that she had lied to journalists who had broken this story, that she had an involvement and stood to benefit from this particular PPE contract. Lawyers' letters were flying around, threatening all sorts to journalists who, it turns out, were completely right. But what was really remarkable, I thought, was that she didn't think that there was anything wrong in this. She said that she had lied. All she had done was lie to journalists to protect her family, she said, from media intrusion. But, you know, if you're lying to journalists, you're lying to the public. I mean, the whole point of the journalists doing the story was to inform the public as to what had gone on with this particular PPE contract. And I think, as I say, if she thought that she was going to engender some sort of public sympathy from this interview, and I think she was badly mistaken.
Theo, did you understand her reasoning that she and her husband had been made scapegoats in all of this?
So her reasoning was that she didn't want to elicit any public intrusion into her private life. She said that she'd previously been subject to press intrusion and she was trying to defend her family against that happening. But as she put it, she wasn't trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes, and lying, as she said, wasn't a crime. To Kevin's point, when you give an interview in this way, and she's also done this sort of documentary, which isn't a documentary, the idea,
paid for.
Yes. Yeah. The point is that you're trying to engender public sympathy, to say, OK, I made a mistake, I'm very sorry, please, I'm not a bad person. What you don't try and do is exactly what's happened in this case, going by the reaction to this interview to the BBC, is to actually harden public opinion against you, to people to say, well, actually, the press was completely correct to ask questions. They were completely correct to write the stories they wrote, and you were actually using your lawyers, paying for your lawyers, to try and threaten them and ward them off. And she's now admitted that she was involved, and she's also said, she's had to, as she said, it wasn't a crime that she was involved in. She is actually going to benefit through her husband to the tune of £60 million. Now, at the same time, there's a Department of Health is suing the company for £122 million, and there's an investigation by the National Crime Agency. She sought to try and blame the government for giving them this contract in the first place. And Oliver Dowden, it was with your colleague Trevor Phillips, turned around and said, well, actually, you didn't recognise that characterisation at all.
Kevin, what do you think the outcome will be from all of this? I mean, she's still a member of the House of Lords, but she's not been sitting for a considerable amount of time.
I think it's about a year, since she recused herself from the House of Lords. I mean, I don't think her attendance record and her contribution to debates was that prolific beforehand. But yeah, she's certainly not been seen around the parliamentary estate for a year. Remarkable, actually, she still has the Conservative Party whip. I think the government will come under quite a lot of pressure tomorrow over that. The Lib Dems were quick out the traps this morning saying that she should be stripped of the Tory party whip. And again, you know, this isn't purely a political party political story. However, it's still not a great look for the government and for Rishi Sunak that one of his peers, albeit one who was ennobled by one of his predecessors, David Cameron, still has the Conservative Party whip, and it's just, you know, another whiff of sleaze really around the Tory party.
And Theo, we learned tonight that Labour are calling for Michael Gove to face questions from MPs on this.
Yes, and of course, whether Mr Gove will have the chance to answer questions before Christmas remains to be seen. But the point, to Kevin's point, you know, this one for lobby tomorrow, and the Prime Minister's spokesman, what is going to... Is Baroness Mone still going to hold the Conservative Party whip in the House of Lords? And Rishi Sunak, you would imagine, would be trying now to distance the Conservative Party from Baroness Mone, because it does fit into this whole scandal around these VIP lanes, this special access that certain firms could get if they had the right connections, if they had the WhatsApps of ministers, and they could somehow go through the process very quickly of being audited and made, you know, be led to believe actually been approved to hand out these contracts. And it's worth remembering, of course, that the equipment that this company provided the NHS was faulty. It wasn't fit for use. It wasn't keeping.
Disputing that, though.
Well, they are disputing it, but that's central to this allegation, and behind why the Department of Health is bringing that legal action is actually the NHS, as part of this, couldn't use that equipment to keep NHS staff, nurses, doctors safe, and also the public safe as they're in hospital.
Let's move on to the FT, Kevin, and this story on the front page about renewed calls for a ceasefire in the Middle East. Lord Cameron quoted as requiring a sustainable ceasefire. I don't know what the difference is in that wording. What do you take that to mean?
I mean, there's definitely a shift in the language. I think that they're trying to sort of reach some sort of middle ground between the calls up until now from America and from both the Conservatives, or from the government and from Labour, for humanitarian pauses, which we did have that for 8 or 9 days a couple of weeks ago, and obviously that then ended, unfortunately. And between that and a full, immediate ceasefire, which obviously a lot of people are calling for, not least France and Ireland, for instance. So this idea of a sustainable ceasefire, I don't think it's actually much. I think it's just different language. I think it still would require both Hamas and the Israeli government wishing a ceasefire to take place, and certainly Hamas don't want it. They've been absolutely clear that they want to continue bombing to destroy the state of Israel if they get the chance. So I think the prospects of an immediate ceasefire are pretty remote. That being said, there's no doubt that international community's view, I think, is starting to shift in terms of the rising concern at the number of innocent civilians being killed in Gaza, the indiscriminate nature of the bombing by Israel, and we've seen tougher language from Joe Biden as well in the last few days. So
yes, he used that very word, indiscriminate, didn't he?
Yes, exactly. So I think you can very well see we'll come to a point where America and then the UK will probably start calling for a ceasefire as well. But as I said, I don't think that is imminent.
OK. Theo, just because of time, let's move on to the Express and their story about the small boat gangs. Britain will smash small boat gangs. They'll destroy the business model of evil small boat gangs. This is a quote from Grant Shapps.
Yes, it's interesting, this story. The particular bit I think is interesting is what we were hearing coming out of Helsinki last week about this idea that Russia was in a way weaponising the migration crisis to try and put pressure on Finland, and indeed Finland had to close most of its borders for a period of time to stop the number of migrants coming into the country. And Grant Shapps, continuing along this line, accusing Russia of employing the tactic to destabilise Western democracies and saying that the UK, and I'm quoting here, can lead an international conversation, he says, on reforming global asylum rules. What the Defence Secretary is essentially saying is that part of the problem around these gangs and the perilous crossing that these migrants are making across Europe and then across the Channel is that it's being pushed if you like, at the source of the problem by Russia, and what he wants to do is actually to try and deal with the problem and from a Ministry of Defence point of view, rather than just looking at it through the prism of the Home Office and the action that Suella Braverman was taking, and now, of course, James Cleverly.
And Kevin, we've seen the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak meeting with Giorgia Meloni and speaking to this very point in Italy.
Yeah, and using quite strong language, certainly strongest language that I've ever heard Rishi Sunak using. He's come in for a fair bit of criticism over it, echoing a lot of the things that Suella Braverman actually had said, and she was criticising and ultimately kicked out of the cabinet over her language. So, yeah, there's no doubt that this has pushed up the political agenda. That being said, it's still not at the very top of voters' concerns if the opinion polls are to be believed. Immigration is still behind NHS and the cost of living crisis.
Depends on who you speak to. Some people say that it is at the top in various polling.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly opinion polls that I've seen. It's still cost of living crisis is very much uppermost in voters' minds. But there's no doubt that there is definitely a constituency, particularly a traditional Conservative voters view immigration is very important, and the Conservatives are concerned about maybe leaking support to reform UK, so I think they have to be seen to be talking tough and taking it seriously.
OK, Kevin and Thea for the moment, thank you. Coming up, reindeer shooting hunts, why one British firm has come under fire in the lead-up to Christmas. Stay with us for more on that.
Kashani, curator of Spyscape, a New York museum dedicated to the world of espionage. Hi.
Hi.
Wow. Now, I don't know where to start. There's so much rich history here. Let's call it that. Maybe this one might be worth the most. Tell me about it.
So this piece here, all of these objects.
Can we
yes,
touch it?
Of course. Yes. All of these objects will feature in our upcoming episodes on our new podcast.
Tell me about this.
And this one is particularly special. This is the briefcase that was given to Napoleon every morning, filled with his intelligence reports. So his chief spy master would bring him reports, foreign newspaper clippings, mail that they had deciphered, written in code, written about Napoleon or other important information.
How old is this?
It's over 200 years old. So if you look very closely, you'll see the initials KP. It's the monogram for Kim Philby.
Kim Philby, wow.
The notorious double agent.
Yeah.
And in this binder, his fourth wife discovered upon his death these manuscripts here.
I'll show you those as well.
Unpublished memoir of Kim
that.
Philby. And
This is his handwriting, obviously.
It's his handwriting, his scribbles, his annotations throughout. And what it is he talks about his early life, his childhood, his decision to be recruited into the KGB. And he also talks about early missions that the KGB sent him, where he was assigned to bring in his friends into the agency.
And finally, tell me about these. This is amazing.
So these cute little animation cartoons are actually part of Cold War anti-communist propaganda. They are original animation artworks from the 1954 film Animal Farm, which was secretly funded by the CIA as a way to inhibit the spread of the Soviet rise of communism. And during the Cold War, culture was used as a way to stop the spread of communism without the public even knowing.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Kevin Schofield, and political journalist and broadcaster Theo Usherwood. Welcome back to both of you. Let's take a look at the FT front page and this story about the economy of Ukraine being in trouble. Imminent disaster warning from the IMF that they've only got a couple of months until they might have to start printing money again, Theo.
The interesting thing about this story, of course, is to go back to last week and the decision by Republicans in the Senate to block further US aid to Ukraine of around $61 billion. And of course, the IMF is warning that more money is needed in order to support Ukraine against the Russian aggression. Interesting, Chatham House, I read an article over the weekend warning the same thing as the IMF, is that Russia has decided to go long in this conflict. It didn't win the short war. The resistance was too significant from Volodymyr Zelensky. And therefore, what they're doing is, in effect, trying to grind the Ukrainian army down. And without that support, whether it's military support, financial aid for the population, the warning is that actually Ukraine is going to crumble quite quickly, and the implications that that could have for Europe. And of course, everybody's attention at the moment is turned to what's happening in the Middle East. Lord Cameron, of course, our Foreign Secretary, it was his first foreign visit was to Kiev. So there's this warning, there's this feeling that whilst everybody is concentrating on what is happening in the Middle East right now, actually Ukraine's in peril, and unless the US and EU allies get together quickly to fill that financial gap, to pay for weapons, to pay to support the economy in Ukraine, it's making a bit of money through grain exports. The country's going to be in real trouble because Russia has the ability to go long in this conflict.
And Kevin, Zelensky keenly recognises this because he's been on this tour with his begging bowl, hasn't he?
Well, he has been, yeah, absolutely. He realises the severity of the situation, obviously. And the EU last week, Hungary vetoed a financial package from the European Union as well. Now, other EU leaders think that this will come back again and they will get some sort of agreement over the line by the end of January, which is obviously cutting it very fine as far as the Ukrainian economy is concerned. But there's no doubt that the world, as Theo says, the world's gaze has turned away from Ukraine, but, you know, it's still as vital as it has ever been. And, Vladimir Putin gave his big end-of-the-year lengthy press conference last week, you know, quite bullish on the war in Ukraine, and, you know, without this support from the West, then Ukraine's really going to struggle, I think.
Let's move on to the Mirror, a completely different story, and one that I just find absolutely horrific. This is a British firm that's offering reindeer shooting hunts in the run-up to Christmas. Quite disturbing, actually, that photo.
This story reminds me of that scandal in Africa where I think it was US trophy hunters hunted that lion, Cecil, the lion, and you had that horrendous picture, and it's a very similar picture on the front page of the Daily Mirror of this reindeer lying prone, obviously being shot in the neck, and two men sitting next to the reindeer looking too pleased with themselves. It's interesting, actually, the Conservative, it was one of the manifesto pledges from 2019, was to end the ban on, to bring about a ban on trophy hunting, to prevent people bringing trophies from hunts back into this country. Now, there's no indication about exactly where this photograph was taken, or whether somebody had tried to bring the carcass or the head of this reindeer back into the country, but the government actually hasn't been able to get that legislation over the line. It was a private member's bill that was talked out last summer in the House of Lords at committee stage, and there's no inkling, I don't think, that they've got time now to bring that legislation back, or whether through a private member's bill or actually a government bill before the next election. But all the while, this is a horrific story on the front page of the Daily Mail.
It is. Kevin, we're going to move on just because of time. You've got about a minute to tell us about Esther McVey waging war on woke. I have banned the word woke from this programme, but it was in the headline.
Well, yes, I don't blame you for doing that. I'm always puzzled as to how many voters actually know what woke even means.
Nobody knows what it means.
It's something that maybe kicks around in Westminster, but ordinary folk, I don't think, know what it means. I mean, I wish I had £1 really for every time that the government has talked about, you know, launching a crackdown on Whitehall waste. I mean, this is going all the way back to 2010, I think, when the Tories first got in. I mean, you know, having a minister for common sense in itself is absolutely bonkers. But she's been given a space in the Mail for an article to talk about, surprise, surprise, equality consultants. They don't like them very much, so they're going to try and crack down on them. And she's talking about, she wants the public sector to embrace common sense instead of political correctness. I mean, common sense means different things to different people.
Exactly.
It's
yes.
mad. But again, I think it goes back to this notion that they're trying to, the Conservatives are trying to employ a sort of core vote strategy to shore up their base. But I'm not sure it's going to win over any converts.
We shall see. Kevin and Theo, thank you very much for the minute. We'll see you in the 11 o'clock hour. In the meantime, let's take a look at the weather for you.